Here is a deeply moving, multi-part story about a single father's journey. It explores the quiet sacrifices, the overwhelming chaos, and the profound love that defines modern fatherhood. The echo of small footsteps. Chapter 1, The New Rhythm. The alarm clock didn't wake David anymore, the silence did. It was a heavy, suffocating kind of silence that settled into the corners of the drafty suburban house at precisely 5:30 a.m. For a few brief seconds, as his mind drifted across the border of sleep and wakefulness, David would reach out his right hand, expecting to find the soft warmth of Sarah's shoulder. Instead, his fingers always met the cold, crisp canvas of a tightly tucked bedsheet. Sarah had been gone for 14 months. A sudden, aggressive illness had taken her in the span of a single semantic season, from autumn's first chill to winter's deep freeze. David sat up, rubbing his face with palms calloused from his job as a structural draftsman. He didn't have the luxury of grieving in slow motion. At 6:15 a.m., the real alarm would go off, not a digital beep, but the sound of 6-year-old Leo tossing his favorite plush dinosaur against the bedroom wall. "Up, Daddy," a small, raspy voice called out from the doorway. David looked up to see Leo, his hair standing up in a chaotic crown of brown curls, wearing mismatched pajamas, Batman tops and Paw Patrol bottoms. "Morning, buddy," David said, forcing a warmth into his voice that his aching bones didn't quite feel. "Did the T-Rex win the battle tonight?" "No," Leo said seriously, walking over and climbing into David's lap. "He got lonely. He wanted to sleep in the big bed." David squeezed his son tight, burying his face in the boy's hair, which still smelled faintly of the berry-scented shampoo Sarah used to buy. "Well, the T-Rex is always welcome here. But first, breakfast. What's the verdict? Pancakes or the crunchy loop cereal?" "Pancakes," Leo shouted, his eyes lighting up. "Pancakes it is. But you have to help me find your shoes today. No disappearing acts like yesterday." The kitchen became a tactical command center. David flipped frozen pancakes with one hand while packing a school lunchbox with the other, a turkey sandwich with the crusts meticulously cut off, a juice box, a sliced apple treated with lemon juice so it wouldn't turn brown, and a small post-it note. Every single day, David drew a terrible, disproportionate stick-figure superhero on that note. He wasn't an artist, but Sarah used to leave notes, so David carried the torch. By 7:45 a.m., they were out the door, but not without a minor crisis involving a missing blue crayon and a sudden declaration from Leo that his socks felt too bumpy. David handled it with the practiced patience of a bomb technician, smoothing out the socks, finding the crayon under the couch, and ushering Leo into the back of their beaten-up Subaru. As he buckled Leo into his car seat, David caught a glimpse of his own reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark circles hollowed his eyes, and silver threads had begun to dominate his beard. He looked like a man trying to run a marathon while carrying an anvil. But when Leo looked up and grinned, pointing out a passing garbage truck, David smiled back. He had to be the anchor. If he drifted, Leo would drown. Chapter 2, The Kindergarten Catastrophe. The transition to kindergarten had been a battlefield. For the first month, Leo wept at the classroom door, gripping David's belt loops with a terrifying, white-knuckled strength. It broke David's heart every single morning, leaving him to drive to the drafting firm with a lump in his throat, questioning every decision he was making. By spring, things had stabilized, or so David thought. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the phone rang at his desk. The caller ID displayed Maplewood Elementary. David's stomach plummeted. "Mr. Vance." The voice of the school secretary, Mrs. Gable, was polite but firm. "We need you to come in." Leo had an incident in the art room. David's mind raced through a catalog of horrors. Did he fall? Did he break a bone? Did he swallow a marble? Is he hurt? David asked, his voice cracking. "No, he's physically fine. But there was an altercation with another student, and Principal Higgins would like to speak with you." 30 minutes later, David was sitting in a miniature plastic chair outside the principal's office, looking entirely ridiculous with his long legs cramped up to his chest. Leo sat next to him, his head bowed, his hands tucked under his thighs. There was a smear of bright green acrylic paint across Leo's forehead. "Leo," David whispered softly. "What happened, buddy?" Leo didn't answer. He just squeezed his eyes shut. The door opened, and Principal Higgins, a stern but compassionate woman in her late 50s, invited them in. Sitting across from her was another parent, a well-dressed woman who looked thoroughly offended, and a small boy who was sniffling loudly. "Mr. Vance, thank you for coming so quickly," Principal Higgins said. "This is Mrs. Albright and her son, Julian. Today during art class, the children were asked to draw a picture of their families for the upcoming spring open house. According to the teacher, Julian made a comment about Leo's drawing, which led to Leo throwing a jar of green paint at Julian's smock. David felt a flush of heat rise to his face. "Leo, is this true?" Leo nodded slowly, a single tear cutting a clean path through the green paint on his cheek. Mrs. Albright crossed her arms. "It wasn't just a jar of paint, Mr. Vance. It ruined Julian's brand new sweater. And more importantly, the behavior is completely unacceptable." Julian merely pointed out reality. "What reality?" David asked, his defensive instincts flaring. Julian told him his drawing was wrong because it only had a dad and a kid, Mrs. Albright said, her tone softening slightly but still carrying an edge of judgment. "He told Leo that a family has to have a mommy." Leo snapped. The room went entirely silent. David felt as if the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He looked down at Leo, who was now crying silently, trying desperately not to let his shoulders shake. David didn't care about Mrs. Albright anymore. He didn't care about the ruined sweater or the principal's disciplinary policy. He knelt on the floor in front of his son's chair, ignoring the creaking of his knees. "Leo," David said, taking the boy's small, paint-stained hands in his own. "Look at me." Leo raised his wet eyes. "Is that why you threw the paint?" He said, "We aren't a real family," Leo choked out, a sob finally breaking through. "He said because mommy died, we're just a broken house." David's heart shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, but his voice remained entirely steady. He pulled Leo into his chest, holding him so tightly that he could feel the boy's rapid heartbeat. "You listen to me," David said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Our house is not broken. A family isn't about how many people are in the house, Leo. It's about how much love is inside it. And I love you enough to fill 100 houses. Do you hear me? You and me, we are a whole team. We are a complete family." Principal Higgins cleared her throat, her expression softening into deep empathy. She looked at Mrs. Albright, who suddenly seemed very interested in her own manicure, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Albright," Principal Higgins said gently, "I think Julian and Leo both have some apologizing to do for their words and actions. But I think we can handle this without a formal suspension. Mr. Vance, why don't you take Leo home for the day? Let's consider it an early dismissal." On the drive home, neither of them spoke for a long time. David stopped at a local diner and bought a quart of cookies and cream ice cream. When they got home, they didn't use bowls. They sat on the kitchen floor with 2 spoons and ate straight from the carton. "I'm sorry about the paint, Daddy," Leo whispered, his mouth full of ice cream. "I know, buddy. We don't throw things when we're mad. Next time, you use your words, or you tell the teacher." "Deal." "Deal." Leo paused, looking at the carton. "Are we really a whole team?" "The best team in the world," David said, reaching over to wipe a stray drop of ice cream from his son's chin. "And don't you ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Chapter 3, The Shadow of the Past. Being a single father meant living in a perpetual state of triage. David quickly learned that he could not keep the house perfectly clean, excel at his job, maintain a social life, and be a perfect parent all at the same time. Something always had to give. Usually, it was his own well-being. His friends from his 20s had slowly drifted away. They were either single and hitting the downtown bars, or they were married with wives who managed the social calendars and playdates. David found himself in a strange, isolated demographic, the solo dad at the playground, sitting on a bench surrounded by clucking groups of mothers who viewed him with a mix of pity and suspicion. One Saturday evening, after Leo had finally fallen asleep, David sat at the small desk in his living room. The house was dark, lit only by the amber glow of a desk lamp. He pulled out an old wooden box from the bottom drawer. Inside were Sarah's things, her silver bracelet, her journal, and a collection of photographs. He picked up a photo taken 2 summers ago at the beach. Sarah was laughing, her hair whipped across her face by the ocean breeze, holding a toddler-aged Leo on her shoulders. David had taken the picture. He remembered how bright the sun had been that day, how the salt air had tasted. Now, looking at the photo, he felt a profound wave of imposter syndrome. Sarah had been the organizer, the nurturer, the one who knew intuitively what a cry meant or how to soothe a fever. David had always been the helper, the secondary support system. "I don't know what I'm doing, Sarah," he whispered to the empty room, a tear slipping down his cheek and spotting the wooden desk. "I'm making it up every day. I'm tired. I'm so incredibly tired." The weight of financial responsibility was a constant, dull ache in his jaw from clenching his teeth at night. Sarah's medical bills had eaten through their savings, and his single salary was stretched to its absolute limit. He had turned down a promotion 3 months ago because it required traveling 2 weekends a month. He couldn't leave Leo, but turning it down meant missing out on a $15,000 raise that would have paid off their remaining debt. He closed the box, locking away the grief because he couldn't afford to be compromised the next morning. He went to bed at midnight, only to be awakened 3 hours later by low whimpering from down the hall. Chapter 4, Flu Season and Broken Promises. It happened in the dead of winter. A brutal strain of influenza A was ripping through Leo's school, and despite David's obsessive use of hand sanitizer, Leo woke up at 3 a.m. with a burning forehead and a dry, hacking cough. David pressed the back of his hand to Leo's skin. It felt like a radiator. A quick check with the thermometer confirmed his fears, 103.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded David's chest. Okay, it's okay, he muttered to himself, scrambling to the bathroom cabinet. He found the children's acetaminophen, measured out the dose with a shaking hand, and brought it to Leo. "Drink this for me, sweetie. It's going to make the fire go away." Leo could barely keep his eyes open. He swallowed the medicine and immediately whimpered, curling into a tight ball. "My tummy hurts, Daddy. Hold me." David climbed into the small twin bed, pulling the covers over both of them. He spent the rest of the night awake, watching Leo's chest rise and fall, checking his temperature every 30 minutes, terrified that the fever would spike higher. By 7 a.m., David had a massive problem. Today was the final presentation for the Riverside commercial project. His firm had been working on it for 6 months, and David was the lead draftsman. He was supposed to present the structural layouts to the city council at 10 a.m. If he missed it, the firm could lose the account, and his job security would be in serious jeopardy. He called his boss, Arthur, a man of the old school who believed that work always came before personal life. "Arthur, it's David. I have an emergency. Leo has a 103 fever. I can't leave him. I need to call into the presentation or have Marcus present my slides." There was a long, heavy pause on the line. "David," Arthur said, his voice flat. "Marcus doesn't know the load-bearing specs for the north wall. The city engineers are going to grill us. We need you there in person. Can't you get a babysitter? Call a neighbor. Your mother. My mother lives 3 states away, Arthur, and no babysitter is going to take a kid with a contagious flu on 2 hours' notice," David said, his voice rising, a dangerous edge creeping in. "I am his only parent. I am not leaving him. If we lose this contract, David, adjustments will have to be made in the department." "Keep that in mind," Arthur said, and hung up. David stared at the phone. The threat was clear. He felt a sudden, violent urge to throw the device against the wall. He was being forced to choose between providing a roof over his son's head and holding his son's hand when he was sick. It was an impossible, cruel paradox. He didn't go to work. He stayed on the floor next to Leo's bed. He spent the day applying cool washcloths to Leo's forehead, coaxing him to take sips of electrolyte solution, and clearing away the eventual mess when Leo's stomach couldn't hold the liquid down. By 4 p.m., the fever finally broke, dropping down to a manageable 100.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Leo fell into a deep, natural sleep, his breathing finally slowing down. David slumped against the kitchen counter, exhausted beyond measure. He opened his laptop and saw an email from Arthur. The subject line read, "Riverside Presentation Outcome." David swallowed hard and opened it. Greater than David. Greater than the presentation was a mess. The city delayed the approval. However, Marcus managed to stall them until next week. I was furious when you called, but Marcus told me about what happened at Leo's school a few months ago with the drawing. I didn't know the full extent of what you've been juggling since Sarah passed. You should have told me. Don't worry about your job. Take the next 2 days as family medical leave. Let's get the Riverside project right next week. Take care of your boy. Asterisk. Greater than Arthur. Greater than. David stared at the screen, a profound sense of relief washing over him so violently that his knees literally buckled. He slid down the cabinet doors onto the kitchen floor, burying his face in his hands, and finally allowed himself to cry. He cried for the stress of the day, for the loss of his wife, and for the sheer, terrifying beauty of surviving another day. Chapter 5, The Parent-Teacher Conference. 2 months later, the spring warmth had returned, melting the last of the stubborn gray snowbanks. It was the night of the spring open house and parent-teacher conferences. David walked down the brightly lit hallways of Maplewood Elementary, holding Leo's hand. The walls were lined with student artwork. David felt a familiar twinge of anxiety as they approached the art room display. He remembered the green paint incident all too vividly. Look, Daddy, there's mine. Leo pointed excitedly to a construction paper frame hanging in the center of the bulletin board. David walked over and looked at the drawing. His heart leapt into his throat. It was a drawing of 2 figures standing on a bright green hill under a yellow sun. The figures were drawn with thick, bold crayons. One was tall, with a black beard and long legs, the other was small, with curly brown hair. They were wearing matching capes, one blue, one red. At the top of the page, in shaky, imperfect kindergarten lettering, Leo had written, "Art team, Daddy and me." There was no missing mommy. There was no sense of a broken house. It was just a picture of absolute, unadulterated happiness. Mr. Vance. David turned around to see Miss Henderson, Leo's art teacher. She had a warm smile on her face. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly, looking at the drawing. After that difficult day a few months ago, Leo came back to class the next week and asked for a brand new piece of paper. He told me he didn't need to draw what everyone else was drawing. He said he wanted to draw his real family, because his family was a special unit. David blinked back tears, looking down at Leo, who was currently trying to balance on one foot along the linoleum floor tile line. He said that. He did, Miss Henderson said, placing a gentle hand on David's arm. "You are doing an incredible job, Mr. Vance. I see a lot of kids from all kinds of homes. Leo is one of the most well-adjusted, empathetic, and loved children in my classroom. Whatever you are doing, it is working." Those words were water in a desert. For 14 months, David had asked himself every single night if he was failing. He had analyzed every mistake, every burnt dinner, every impatient sigh, and every lonely hour. To hear, from an outside observer, that his son was thriving was a validation he didn't know he desperately needed. Chapter 6, The Canvas of Tomorrow. That night, after returning home from the open house, David didn't put Leo's drawing in a folder or hide it away in a drawer. He found a frame, took down an old landscape print in the living room, and hung Leo's drawing directly above the fireplace, the most prominent spot in the entire house. "Right there," David said, stepping back to admire it. "The team logo." Leo laughed, jumping onto the sofa. "We look cool in capes, Daddy." "We look awesome in capes," David corrected him. "All right, caped crusader. It's past 9 p.m. Brush teeth, pajamas, bed." An hour later, the house was quiet once again. But the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt peaceful. It felt like a space waiting to be filled with new memories, rather than just the echoes of old ones. David walked out onto the small back porch, holding a mug of chamomile tea. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of blooming lilacs. He looked up at the stars, clear and bright against the dark suburban sky. He knew the road ahead wasn't suddenly going to become smooth. There would be more fevers, more difficult financial decisions, more teenage rebellion down the line, and many more moments where he would feel entirely out of his depth. He would still miss Sarah every single day, and that ache would never truly leave his chest. But as he listened to the faint, steady sound of Leo's soft breathing through the open window of the downstairs bedroom, David smiled. They weren't a broken house. They were a family, built not on blueprint perfection, but on the resilient, unbreakable architecture of love. He was a single dad, and he was more than enough.